The head coach of Team USA walked away from this tournament after just 2 games. Carol Lawson did not get suspended. She was not removed. She left on her own to return to her college job at Duke University, handing assistant Nate Tibbetts the keys to the final 3 qualifier games. And while Team USA technically won every single contest in this qualifying run, what unfolded on that court, especially against Spain, should genuinely alarm anyone who cares about whether the United States brings home gold in September. Because Caitlin Clark, the most transformative force in women's basketball right now, spent critical stretches of these qualifier games camped in a corner, parked on the wing, waiting for entry passes like a role player, watching teammates drift into isolation mid-range attempts, while one of the most sophisticated offensive brains in the sport sat dormant, arms at her sides, waiting for a system that refused to use her correctly. This is not a rotation debate. This is a coaching philosophy crisis happening in real time, running out of runway before the World Cup begins. If you have been watching these qualifier games and felt something deeply broken about what you were seeing, you were not imagining it. Hit that like button right now so this analysis reaches the people who need to hear it, because what we are about to break down goes far deeper than any highlight reel will take you. The evidence is on the tape and the implications are serious. Now let's establish exactly what happened with this coaching situation. Because the coach fired, framing circulating on other channels is actually more charitable than the truth. Carol Lawson was the designated head coach of Team USA's qualifier campaign. She was physically present for 2 of the 5 games. Then she returned to Duke and her college obligations, leaving the squad in the hands of assistant Nate Tibbetts for the back half of the tournament, including the Spain game that very nearly became a disaster. That is not a firing. That is a full coaching vacuum appearing in the middle of an international tournament, where the stated purpose is building chemistry, establishing rotations, and developing the systematic cohesion that will be required to beat elite European programs in late August. Tibbetts did his professional best. But every new coaching voice introduces different priorities, different preferences for lineup construction, and different instincts in late-game situations. The continuity that international basketball demands, the kind that defined Team USA's dominance for decades, evaporated mid-qualifier, and the effects were visible in every single game Tibbetts managed without the full context of what the program was originally building. USA basketball's historical dominance in international competition has always rested on one foundation: system clarity. Every gold medal run, the 2012 London campaign, the 2016 Rio cycle, the 2020 Tokyo competition, was built on defined roles, a unified coaching voice, and players who understood exactly what the system asked of them before the first tip-off. Go back and watch those teams operate in crunch time. Nobody hesitated, nobody freelanced. The ball moved because trust had been built over months of consistent coaching philosophy. What these qualifiers produced was the opposite: a rotating carousel of lineup experiments, different assistants running different games, and no single voice with the authority and presence to make the hard decisions stick. And at the center of the most damaging decision sits an experiment that has been discussed, debated, and dissected, and is still happening anyway. Caitlin Clark is not a small forward. She has never been a small forward. Her professional value, the thing that turned the Indiana Fever from a bottom-tier franchise into the most-watched team in league history, is her ability to operate as a floor general. Her deep shooting range creates gravity that warps defensive schemes. Her vision from the point guard position creates layups, open threes, and transition opportunities for every player around her. Running the offense through her hands is not a stylistic preference. It is the formula for maximum output from every other player on that roster. Instead, these qualifier games repeatedly featured Clark stationed on the wing, parked in the corner, waiting for catches rather than creating actions. And the moment she touched the ball, Spain's defensive scheme activated immediately. Spain was running what is known as a soft box and one, essentially a zone defense with a designated individual assignment to body up Clark at all times. Every time Clark came off a high screen and tried to handle the ball, Spain blitzed. 2 defenders immediately. The purpose was elementary: force the ball out of Clark's hands before she could read the floor and create. And if the spacing around her had been functional, that blitz would have been Team USA's most lethal offensive weapon, because a double team on Clark automatically leaves someone open somewhere on the floor. The problem was that the experimental lineups had already compromised the spacing. Players operating in positions that don't align with their natural strengths take longer to recognize where the advantage is. Spain's defense did not need to be perfect. It just needed to be disciplined enough to survive the seconds of hesitation created by a system working against itself. And that is exactly what Spain was: disciplined, organized, and backed by legitimate talent that the American program cannot afford to dismiss as a stepping-stone opponent any longer. Players like Alba Pham, already projected as a top pick in the upcoming WNBA draft, moved against American defenders with an athleticism and comfort level that should have sent a clear message. She wasn't intimidated, she wasn't overwhelmed by the moment. She looked like someone who had studied this roster closely and understood its vulnerabilities better than the coaching staff was willing to acknowledge. Spain missed layups, makeable layups, in volume. If Spain converts at even a below-average rate in the paint during that game, we are potentially having a completely different conversation about what these qualifiers produced. Over time, minimum, possibly a historic qualifier upset, Team USA won. But the manner of that win, the fourth quarter stagnation, the broken offensive rotations, the defensive lapses off backdoor cuts that Spain exploited repeatedly, those are not corrected simply by advancing to the next round. They are problems with a documented origin, and that origin is a coaching structure that lost its head coach after 2 games and continued running experiments that produced the least efficient basketball this roster is capable of playing. Caitlin Clark's stat line against Spain was 7 points, with uncharacteristic misses, including an airball and a shot that clipped the wrong side of the backboard. The critics are already doing what critics do, pointing at the numbers without asking the structural question that context demands. A rhythm player who needs the ball in her hands to stay mentally and physically sharp was sitting on the bench for extended stretches, then being reinserted into a lineup where her role was catch-and-shoot specialist on the weak side. Getting cold off a long bench absence is not a character flaw. It is physics, and putting her back in out of position is not opportunity. It is the appearance of opportunity without any of the structural support that makes Clark's skill set actually function. The pressure on Clark throughout this qualifier run has been extraordinary. Every miss analyzed, every turnover headlined. But the real story is not Clark's performance under those circumstances. The real story is that the coaching staff is creating the conditions under which failure becomes far more likely, and then acting surprised when it materializes. Drop a comment right now. Do you think the Team USA coaching staff has enough time to fix this before the World Cup? Because the roster data from these 5 games points to a gap between where this team currently operates and where it needs to be, that the final score lines are actively obscuring. Let's go deeper, because buried inside all of this structural dysfunction, there are genuine performance stories that reveal exactly what this team can look like when the system gets out of its own way. Every lineup combination that produced sustained offensive efficiency in these qualifiers shared one common variable: Caitlin Clark operating as the initiating guard, not as a corner option. When Clark runs the high screen and roll from the top of the key, the defense faces an impossible choice: contain her pull-up range and leave a cutter open, blitz her and leave a shooter open, sag into the paint and watch her step into threes that she drills at a rate that punishes any conservative coverage. None of those are acceptable outcomes for a defense. All of them are wins for Team USA, but only when the spacing around her is correct and the players in complementary roles are operating in positions that match their actual skill sets. The lineup that generated the most electric basketball across the entire qualifier campaign was Clark alongside Paige Bueckers, Kelsey Plum, Ryan Howard, and Derica Hamby. That 5-player unit ran at a pace that made Spain's defense scramble in ways no other lineup combination produced. The ball moved faster. Transition opportunities materialized out of possessions that would have stalled under the veteran-heavy rotations. The defense was constantly reacting rather than dictating. Hamby's individual performance in the Spain game deserves considerably more attention than it has received. 14 points, a team-high efficiency rating of 22, a plus 13 on the floor, meaning Team USA outscored Spain by 13 points in her minutes. She runs the floor at a track sprint pace, finishes through contact with a consistency that forces opponents to foul rather than contest cleanly, and her motor never drops regardless of whether her shots are falling or not. She is the physical engine that allows the guards around her to function at their highest level, because her constant movement and screen setting creates the actions that the entire offensive system is designed to exploit. The Angel Reese conversation requires a fair and complete treatment. Reese entered these qualifiers carrying an offensive profile built over years at the Chicago Sky that simply does not translate automatically to what Team USA's system requires. At Chicago, she functions extensively from the high post, handling the ball, making reads, taking on creative responsibilities that her team needs her to shoulder. Team USA asks her to be a traditional rim runner and screen setter, which demands an instinctual remapping of her decision-making in real time. When she secures a defensive rebound, the correct action in Team USA's system is an immediate outlet to a guard. At Chicago, she would have pushed the ball herself. Those are not minor adjustments. They represent a fundamental role redefinition that takes genuine basketball intelligence to execute under tournament conditions. And against Spain, you saw her make that adjustment. She logged 8 rebounds and was consistently pivoting to find the outlet pass the moment she secured possession. Fans who were vocal about her ball-handling tendencies in earlier games watched a measurably different version of Angel Reese against Spain. Her continued development in this role between now and the World Cup roster lock could be one of the most consequential factors in how competitive this team ultimately is in late August. If this kind of deep analysis is the reason you keep coming back, consider joining the channel as a member. Your support is what keeps us digging into the stories nobody else is covering at this level. Even with Reese developing and Hamby performing at an elite efficiency level, the rotation decisions that generated the least productive basketball kept getting repeated. Chelsea Gray started every single qualifier game. In the Spain matchup specifically, she logged the most minutes on the roster. Gray's career accomplishments are legitimate and undeniable. She is one of the most decorated players in the history of USA basketball. But starting a player based on what she accomplished in previous international cycles, when the pace and personnel of this current roster demand a completely different approach, is a philosophical decision that has real, visible consequences on the court. The contrast when the younger players check in is not subtle. It is immediate, and it is stark. The game changes at a perceptible level and not in a direction that favors the veteran approach. Share this breakdown right now with someone who watched these games and felt the frustration without being able to fully name it, because the conversation about what this team needs to fix before September needs to reach as many people as possible. Here is the perspective that the qualifier scorelines are making it dangerously easy to avoid. The small forward experiment with Caitlin Clark was not just a tactical misalignment. It was an active investment of tournament reps into a system that produced the worst basketball this roster is capable of. Every game where Clark played the wing is a game where the coaching staff did not develop the point guard rhythms, the high screen and roll chemistry, and the late-game offensive structure that will determine whether this team can close out elite competition when the margin for error is 0. The fourth quarter against Spain was a case study in what happens when no designated floor general is directing traffic. The ball stopped moving, cutting lanes disappeared. Late-game possessions became improvised individual play after improvised individual play. Exactly what a disciplined defense like Spain's is designed to create. Without a clear primary ball handler, the remaining players defaulted to hero ball, predictable, inefficient, and completely readable to any coaching staff that has done its homework on how to neutralize this team. The defensive rotations compounded the problem. Players operating in unfamiliar positions take longer to execute their closeout assignments. Spain identified this and ran quick backdoor cuts and perimeter actions off it repeatedly in the second half. A team that cannot reliably stop an opponent from getting comfortable late in a qualifier game is going to face exponentially greater challenges against France, against Australia, against any top 10 program that has studied this team's vulnerabilities with the same analytical rigor that Spain clearly brought to the preparation. Kelsey Plum deserves individual recognition here, because she produced 18 points in the Spain game while operating in a system that was actively undermining her floor spacing. Plum plays with an aggression and a motor that is genuinely difficult to contain, diving for loose balls, initiating full-court pressure, hitting massive shots in moments when the offense sputtered. She proved once again why her name belongs in every starting lineup conversation. But even her heroics were produced despite a positional structure that compromised the floor spacing she needs to operate at maximum efficiency. She was carrying energy that the system should have been generating for her. The World Cup picture comes into sharp focus when you examine the field. The United States is not showing up to compete against opponents who are standing still, waiting to be dominated. European programs have spent years studying American tendencies, developing players who compete in the WNBA for months every season, and building stylistic approaches specifically calibrated to what American teams do. France has WNBA-level size and speed distributed throughout its roster. Spain demonstrated in these qualifiers that they are not overmatched athletically. They are a converted possession away from having generated the biggest result in qualifier history. If the small forward experiment with Clark continues into the World Cup, if the head coaching vacancy created by Lawson's mid-tournament departure is not filled with a unified philosophical voice before August, the gold medal outcome that American fans have historically taken as a given is genuinely at risk, not as speculation, as a mathematical basketball reality grounded in what the evidence from these 5 qualifier games already documents. The blueprint for what this team can be is not hidden. It was visible every time Clark ran the offense from the point, every time Hamby set a screen that forced a defensive rotation, every time Beckers and Clark began to find each other's timing in transition. The version of this team that existed in those minutes is one of the most dangerous offensive units in international basketball. The decision between now and the World Cup roster lock is not about which players are available. It is about whether the coaching staff has the honesty to acknowledge what these qualifiers were actually saying, and the courage to build the program around the truth. Subscribe now and turn on the notification bell, because the roster decisions that will define whether Team USA wins gold or comes home empty-handed are going to happen in the next several weeks. And we will be here to break down every move, every lineup change, and every signal that this coaching staff is actually paying attention to what Spain already exposed. The future of this gold medal run is being decided right now, in film rooms and roster conversations that won't be public. But the evidence is already on the court for anyone willing to look at it honestly.